Hello, today's topic is, what weird thing did somebody tell you that they shouldn't have felt so comfortable telling you? Please consider subscribing if you enjoy the video. I was working in a photo lab at Walmart. They have a policy about not printing lewd photos, and they have to be destroyed if they are printed. 20 minutes before closing, a woman comes and asks to print some photos. I direct her to the kiosk, and after a while they start printing in the back. I notice that the first few photos are poorly cropped as they come off the machine. They're full body portraits with half her face cut off. This isn't uncommon. The software isn't super intuitive, so I check the next few to see if it happened on more. The next few photos are the same framing, just different poses. It looks like she's showing off this nice dress, and then she's reclining on a couch, and then she's on a bed, and then her legs are spread. Now I have to figure how to tell her I can't sell these prints. I'm already with the policy binder out and open to the relevant page when she comes up, and I start explaining. I'm sorry ma'am, I can't sell some of these photos to you. They violate our inappropriate print policy, so I had to share. Oh, I'm so sorry, I forgot those were in there. It's fine, he's not allowed to have those kinds of photos in prison anyway. I was so relieved that she wasn't going to yell at me that JT didn't register what she said until after she left. I see my mechanic like 5 times a year, and he always tells me how many Asian girls he met online and had sex with since we last met. It's like an unprompted tradition he must get past before we can talk about what's wrong with the car. As a passenger in an Uber, I had my driver tell me that day was the anniversary of the day his son was murdered, as we drove past the spot where it happened for, according to him, the first time since it had happened. We then drove past a building where he told me the murderer worked, pretending to be a man of God with, in his words, 4 bodies on him. His son was a gangster. My driver was a 56-year-old father just lost in his grief that day, and when he picked me up in that neighborhood in Minneapolis Midtown, it just came out. He also told me that every single day he thought about killing the man who killed his son and then just turning himself in. He told me his wife told him once a week that he better not make her a widow. It wasn't the ride to the airport that I signed up for, but that was okay. He needed to talk to someone. As a father, I could feel his pain. His kid was weeks away from leaving the life and joining his brother in the military. He told me he was killed by his second-in-command right after he said he was joining the service. My bullshit meter is always very high. He wasn't telling tall tales or workshopping material. I just happened to get in his car when a year's worth of hell came to the surface. After he dropped me off, he told me he was going home because he needed to talk to his wife. My 89-year-old grandfather told me his and his wife's favorite sexual position. Number 1 on the list of things I never ever needed to know. Sitting with my fiancé's new friend, and she starts bragging to me how she's been manipulating men, including my fiancé, into doing things for her, picking up her paychecks for her, babysitting her son while she goes on a date, cleaning her place for her, etc. Then she started showing me these long messages she'd sent to guys she had just met on dating sites, telling them how my fiancé was her best friend and her standard for guys. An ex-coworker, whom I barely knew, told me she was in a sexual relationship with her biological father. They had been together for about 10 years, and moved to a new city together. She was only 25 or so. I politely smiled, switched topics, and went home shortly afterwards. Of course I kept that story to myself, but damn. A kid I was sort of friends with in high school told me that he regularly had sex with his twin brother. For the record, he had no history of ever being sexually abused, and from what he talked about, it was mutually suggested between the two. They were just gay and into incest. Managed a restaurant and a man was there to service the building, HVAC or something. He seems anxious and starts rattling on about his girlfriend and then her brother and how said brother fricked a cow. Immediately apologizes. I don't know why I said that. I probably shouldn't have told you that. Sorry. Strange. Coworker, whom I wasn't ever close with, decided to tell me at work, across the entire office, that she and her husband were having marital problems due to lack of sex. He wanted more sex, but since she wasn't trying to get pregnant, she didn't see the point and said he needed to get over it. This happened loudly, out of nowhere and with no prompting. What made it more uncomfortable was that she was our HR person. Had a super weird chick who lived in our neighborhood once who asked me if I knew the rules of polygamy and swinging. I was like, no. She then proceeded to tell me some long, rambling story about a house party that her husband was invited to, but not her, because they wanted to sleep with her husband, but she couldn't come along to participate or watch or whatever. Her husband was probably 6'4", but weighed around 350 pounds. He was probably the original neck, but she was no prize either. I doubt anybody wanted to sleep with either of them. She also told me she hated sunbathing nude, because her nipples always got super sunburned. Oh, okay then. Dude pays me at work, then tells me he can't come. He can have an orgasm, but then needs to use a straw to get it all out. Business partner of my then boss, that had just introduced himself to me. Nice team you've got here. We should all go on a trip to Thailand together. You can frick prostitutes without protection over there. They all have documents from their doctors showing that they're clean. Dude was also married, with 2 young daughters. What's the actual frick? I met a professional acquaintance at a friend's show one night. We knew each other vaguely, having met a couple of times, so we started having small talk. The guy obviously had gotten one too many beers, and felt it was a great time to tell me all about his dumb moves from his early adulthood. How his fiancée cheated on him with his best friend and how he became an alcoholic. Alright, definitely awkward, but manageable so far. It took a turn for the worse when he suddenly felt comfortable enough to describe, in details, how he and his friends had raped a teenage boy that was blackout drunk. The acquaintance and his friends were drunk and thought it would be fun to do that while the boy was literally unconscious and unresponsive. I noped the frick out of the conversation right after that and hope I'll never run into him again. Cashier at St. Louis Bread Company, informing me she's on her period and flowing very heavily. I get it. I'm a fellow woman, but damn, it's a restaurant. A while ago, my now wife, then, my fiancé, and I were preparing to get married here in Austin. We spent several Sundays visiting some of the churches in the area that might serve as the ceremony venue to get a feel for them. We visited one beautiful, fairly large, older church near downtown. At the appropriate time in the service, the minister, priest, an older gentleman, roughly late 60s-ish, started giving an odd sermon about tithing and how the parishioners had been letting the church down and in a way they were stealing from God by not giving enough. It was a bit of a strange one, and it didn't seem well constructed and thought out, much more on the fly than sermons I was used to. Anyway, after about 10 minutes of this, he wrapped up and asked everyone to bow their heads for prayer, then immediately walked off the stage and started walking down the aisle. My wife and I were about 2-3 of the way back and in an empty row. The service was not particularly well attended. I'm thinking to myself, well, that was kind of a weird. What's he doing? He's heading toward us. Oh, God. While the congregation was still mid-group prayer, he walked to our row and then slid all the way in until he was right next to me. Everyone was watching him, and now us, as they are fathered, or whatever it was. We finished the prayer and then sat down for the offering and a song. He then leaned over and whispered, "Good morning." We shook hands and he continued, "I wanted to let you know that I just had a mental breakdown up there a moment ago." Oh, hey, that's all right. I thought it was. Great. I stammered in reply, "You're kind, but no, I'm kind of falling apart. I saw you two come in, and recognized you and you. I didn't want you to take that sermon as typical of our congregation. I have to get going. It was a pleasure meeting you both." And he got up and walked right out the back door. We didn't choose that church. Me, sits down for my lunch break at work. Random coworker comes and sits down and says to me, "So I've been watching Cartoon Monster Peen." Okay, Starbucks barista here. I was working the drive-thru and some lady comes and asking for an iced coffee with heavy cream. I pay it no mind as it's not even close to my weirdest order. She gets to the window and starts trying to explain the motifs behind getting this drink. By the way, I'm not getting this for the caffeine. I'm constipated, whatever still hasn't fazed me. I'm used to weird shit like this. She continued, "I tried an enema 2 days ago and that bullshit didn't work at all. That's where I had to stop and go to the back to breath. I was not ready for that." Over my working life, different women co-workers have shared some pretty intimate things. Having the runs, how much difficulty she had getting her boyfriend to frick her, explaining her dating, sexual history of the prior 7 years, with diagrams, edited to add diagrams, a kind of Gantt chart showing how they all overlapped, a mood web of qualities and faults, and a ruler as a visual aid to demonstrate dong sizes. My coworker went into great detail, including a hand-drawn diagram, about how constipated she was after one of her C-sections. She said she was so uncomfortable that she asked her husband to try to dig some of the poo out of her butt with his finger. So, she put a towel down on the bed, laid on her side, and he got to work. After some successful digging, she rolled over and noticed a butter knife on the bedside table and asked what it was doing there, to which he responded, "Well, it was too hard for my fingers. We are nurses." She told this story at the desk to a group of at least 5 people. We were all mortified. My sociology professor decades ago smoking outside of class with some of the guys as I was walking into the building. Me. Is the school going to give you crap for smoking with your students? Him. I could be doing something else with my students, if you're interested. And he winked. You. I don't know if this qualifies, but some drunk girl said I would be a nice weekday-only boyfriend very casually, and that felt like a very backhanded compliment to drop on me so suddenly. I seriously wouldn't mind being arped by an octopus. You know, like in anime and stuff. This was said to me by a coworker, female, while on the clock, during lunch rush, in the dining room, loud enough for costumers to hear. What triggered this confession? I mentioned in passing how much I like fried calamari. Kind of related. In a previous job where I was in senior management, I had an employee come to me and asked to speak privately. He said he needed a few days off. He had just found out his son was being molested by a neighbor. He needed to be at home and deal with his son and the police, but didn't want anyone else to know. For obvious reasons. I told him to take the time off and that I would take care of things for him. I told scheduling and HR that he was to be given 3 days off, and the HR manager pestered me to know why. I told her I couldn't say, but it was a legit reason, and that's that. She was pissed. Demanded I tell her, and even got the regional manager involved. I told them to drop it, that I was going into details. It was well within my power to make that decision, but the HR and regional managers were both cunts. They told me if I didn't tell them, there would be consequences for me. I told them clearly to drop it, that it was a sensitive subject, and the employee took me into his confidence. End of story. The employee wasn't one to take excessive time off, and he had sickened vacation time. So I told them there was no reason to make this an issue. The weird thing is, I didn't have a particularly good relationship with this employee. Not sure why he told me, as he was friends with another of the senior managers, who could have taken care of this for him. But I was known to be an employee-first manager, and I still am. I suppose he trusted me. Despite us having some differences, it was quite heavy burden to take on, knowing what this guy was going though. But you don't always get to pick your battles. Sometimes you just have to fight them. I never did share the reason why I allowed the time off, even after several of the bosses cornered and pestered me. In the end, I was let go for others' reasons, standing up for another employee, but feel this incident contributed to it. Frick I would do it all over again. Right is right. Chatting with another mum at the park. Now we can chat about some pretty weird things, like discussing your kids' pooping habits would be a normal conversation. Even to some extent discussing how things are going in the bedroom isn't that weird. But I've heard some weird things other moms have confided to me. The one that stands out was a mom who confessed she was a closeted lesbian, in a loveless marriage, who has a huge crush on her teenage son's girlfriend. It got even weirder too. My comment from a different post, but fits here as well. My mother told me she named me after a character of a book she had read, and she made me read that book after I was finished. Don't ask me why I finished that book. I just was like, what the frick did I just read? The guy in the book with my name was a freaking pedophile and literally died after not eating for a month, because he loved that one little girl. My mum said it was the best book she had ever read. I got nightmares of it, but okay. Yes, I hate my name now. Years ago, I lived in Florida. My girlfriend, now wife, and I went to a Chili's one night to get some drinks with her co-workers. After they left, we went back inside to the bar for one more drink, because it was still early and we lived nearby. This older guy walks in, and sits down a few stools away from us and immediately starts giving us some light-hearted shit about football. Then notices my girlfriend typing something on her phone. Within 60 seconds of meeting us, he decided to drop this. Oh, you like looking things up on them phones, huh? Google my name. We Google his name and the first result is a news article that names him as the victim of an attempted murder-suicide by his wife. She shot him in the head, then shot herself in the head right after she died. He didn't. Police came after a call of shots fired. They found him unconscious, but alive, med-flighted him to a hospital and he woke up later that day. And that was his icebreaker story. My super religious ex-girlfriend from college told me that she had been possessed by a demon. It was about a year after we started dating. She was one of the most honest people I've ever met. Someone who just couldn't lie. I knew from the moment she told me this that she genuinely believed she'd been possessed. I kind of shrugged it off and tried not to ever address it. And then I met her family. On the first day I met them, the subject came up and I just couldn't avoid it no matter how hard I tried. It turned out that she'd sinned by giving up her virginity before we met, and this allowed the demon to possess her. They even had a name for the demon, which I can't remember, but it was supposedly the name she'd always wanted to give to her future firstborn son. The family had their pastor, who I would later learn had no pastoral training, no seminary schooling, etc., come to their house to perform an exorcism. Long story short, this presumably freed her of the demon. I continued dating her for another year or so after this. Anytime we became intimate, she would be all into it, and then afterwards she would be terrified that she had possibly opened the door to let the demon back in. Here's my theory about what really happened, although I never got any confirmation on it. Within minutes of meeting her family, it became clear that this was a truth-telling family. They were honest and open about everything to an uncomfortable degree. It was almost as if she was raised to believe that lying was the greatest sin of all, right up there with fornication. So when she lost her virginity, she was so ashamed that she would just stay quiet about the whole thing so that she wouldn't have to sin twice by lying about it. When she was confronted about it, instead of admitting it, she would stay silent about it. The family went to their pastor and explained the situation. This charlatan convinced them that this was a case of possession, and only through confession could she be released of the demon. I think the whole exorcism thing was just an elaborate ploy by the pastor to get her to confess to losing her virginity, which she did, and they were all brainwashed into thinking this was a successful exorcism of demonic possession. I'm no psychologist, so I could be way off base here. It's just my best guess based on everything I was able to piece together. Waiting to get my windshield replaced a few weeks back, an older gentleman tried to hook me up with his son, then went on to tell me about his wife who had died 8 months ago, and his son's relationship with his ex-girlfriend. She was pretending to be pregnant. This son is also on the autism spectrum, though not as bad as the good doctor, has psoriasis, and works at the deli counter of a grocery store, where he was forced to wear long sleeves, because people were complaining that his skin was flaking into their meat, all within about a half hour or so. I have what is called a mother confessor face. Please subscribe if you like the video. It really helps the channel to grow. Adios.